Good morning, everybody. Welcome. This is the October 6th meeting of the Science and Data Subcommittee of the Climate Council. We have a 2-hour meeting today that goes from 10 to noon. And I posted earlier, I'll post it again for anybody who's joined since the chat has the agenda for the meeting, which is also on the Climate Council website. So I think I'll just do the initial welcome and intro, since Megan's going to have the first part of the agenda as we do some updates, but maybe just do a brief overview of the agenda as posted before we dive in, and then see if there's any feedback from committee members or about the agenda or questions before we dive in. So we want to start talking about some scheduling things, and then we'll go into updates on the contractual work that is underway. There's a number of pieces from the life cycle analysis, municipal vulnerability index, agricultural emissions, and the thermal sector analysis. We'll have some time for updates from subcommittee liaisons, especially if there's work happening in those subcommittees or in task groups that you're part of that are relevant to the work of this committee. We want to do some time for committee membership updates. And then we had a task group meet earlier this week that included feedback from Kevin Geiger, from Claire, and then Colin and Megan and I worked to compile in the requested format the budget requests to send on for council considerations from the Science and Data Subcommittee. So those are available as an attachment on that page on the calendar for today's meeting. And then we'll have some time for public comment. I do, correct me if I'm wrong, Megan, but it looks like the minutes were not attached, so I don't know as though we can actually approve those today. I think we're going to have to wait until a future meeting, unless.
Yeah, we do have them. So let me just, I can put them in the chat, but yeah, you're probably right, Jared, that we should wait to formally review them, but I'll make sure folks can access them in the meantime.
Great. So are there any comments or questions on that agenda before we dive in? Okay, so with that, I think it's over to you, Megan, to kick off some of these contractual work updates.
Thanks, Jared. And sorry, folks might have to bear with me going on and off mute. I'm still dealing with a lingering cough that's very persistent. So I guess I just first wanted to acknowledge that as of yesterday, the steering committee approved Colin as being the co-chair of this subcommittee, and so I'm happy and excited to hand that off to Colin in terms of the administration's representative for this subcommittee. As you all know, Colin is really has a great deal of expertise and experience in dealing with data related to greenhouse gas emissions and all the supplemental tools that we've been talking about. So I think you'll be in really good hands with his leadership and Jared's. And I'm happy to support the subcommittee today and talking about some of the recent work that we've been doing, especially related to the budget, and then also to provide the updates related to the contractual work. So but welcome to Colin. I mean, I know you've been participating in this group for a while, but I think it's a great transition.
Sorry, I'll just jump in and say thanks, man. Appreciate that, and looking forward to continue working with you all and in this new role. Thank you.
Great. So I guess since Jane is with us today, I wonder if Jane is actually in a better position to give a better update on the life cycle analysis. But as this subcommittee knows, we did review responses to an RFP, and the task group that was responsible for that review did select a contractor based on our review process. And Jane has been working with that selected entity to hopefully enter into a contract. And I don't know, Jane, if there's anything that you want to mention there, but it's my understanding that we're just working towards that and hope to have a contract in place potentially by the end of this month.
Yep, that's great. Things stalled with me for a bit, and then the way that proposal was delivered, it was not clear on they didn't break up the cost and deliverables very clearly. And so we've had a lot of back and forth around clearer deliverables and what the specific costs are for each deliverable in the contract in order to phase out the payments more accurately. We have all of that information now, and the scope of work in the contract had already been drafted based on the proposal, but I have to add in those numbers that I've only just received earlier this week. And so my hope is to transition the contract finally from my desk to our business office tomorrow morning. I have blocked to do it. And then it'll be in the business office's hands for legal review and then to forward for signing. So I think having it signed by the end of the month is a very realistic timeline. And I built out the deliverables based on a start date of the end of the month, and then readdressed all of those deliverables based on that delayed starts from the original proposal. So hopeful that we'll start moving forward. And Megan and I discussed this yesterday, and she can tie it to your conversation that I won't stick around for, but Megan, based on the recommendations that likely you all as a subcommittee will put forward for the potential of adding more funding to some of the analysis for life cycle analysis. Based on that, Megan has agreed to review the scope of work also, just to be clear that anything that you might want to do with increased funding, if you were allotted it, is already in the scope of work, because what's clear with contractual work, for the state, is that you can add money and time to contracts very easily without rebidding them, but you cannot add new deliverables or scope of work without reposting an RFP and bidding and all of that. So hopefully anything that you might want to do with life cycle analysis, and if you were allotted extra resources, is already in there, and it's just providing an extra level of detail and time to this contract that we already have in place.
Thanks, Jane. Any questions on the life cycle contract or that timeline? Okay, and then I know others, Leslie Ann, you've also been working on the Municipal Vulnerability Index contract, but and Jane is here too, so just want to give folks an opportunity to give any updates on that. I don't know if there are any since we last talked in September, but feel free.
That contract is fully drafted. It's been with our business office and legal counsel for 2 weeks. And so maybe that's demonstrative of my hope that the life cycle analysis will move faster, but it's been with the business office and I haven't seen it advanced through for signature yet, but I did make some changes to the contract 2 weeks ago based on legal review. And so think that it's all set and just have been waiting for it to see it move out to the vendor for signature. But any day now, the Municipal Vulnerability Index contract will be executed.
So does that mean, Jane, that at that point you'll be able to actually make an announcement if you won the bid and all of that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't completely understand you, Leslie Ann.
No. As I said, would that be the point at which you'd be able to actually release the name of the contractor who won the bid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and we're working in good faith with the consultant that the task group selected as their top priority, and at which point, once the contract's fully executed, that'll be public information and documents. And then we'll re-engage with, on both of these contracts, importantly, we'll re-engage with the task group to move forward with the finality of developing the work plan and all of that with input from all of you.
Thanks.
Okay, next update from Colin on the agricultural emissions RFP.
Sure, thanks, Megan. Yeah, I'm not sure there's a whole lot to say on this one that I haven't covered before. The RFP is now posted, and the question period, kind of this period to ask questions about it, has passed, and we did have one set of questions come in that we are in the process of responding to. So I think, yeah, kind of all that remains right now is to wait and see if we get any proposals out of it. So yeah, I think that'll probably do it for my update, unless people do have questions on that RFP in general. I'm happy to answer those, but that's pretty much the update.
Drop the RFP in the chat for folks since it's open, and if you have any consultants in mind that you could forward it to or address, I'm happy to have more people bid on it.
Great. And we'll talk a little bit more in our budget conversation about kind of similar issues to the life cycle RFP or the life cycle contract, maybe with the need for additional resources related to the ag RFP as well. But last but not least, Brian is here to give us an update on the RFP for investigating more options for emission reductions in the thermal sector. And there's been, we haven't talked about this a ton in this group, but there has been conversations going on at cross-sector mitigation subcommittee related to this RFP. So if folks are interested in that, encourage you to access the recordings of those meetings. But Brian, thanks for being here to give an update.
Sure thing. Good morning, everybody. I dropped the link to the RFP in the chat right underneath the other one. So feel free to look at it. Thanks to all of those folks that commented on that RFP. Jane posted that on Wednesday, September 28th. Questions are due to Jane via email by Tuesday, October 11th, 4 p.m. We'll be posting responses to those questions on a rolling basis. All the questions are going to be answered by the 14th, and the closing date is October 18th at 4 p.m. That's a Tuesday. Estimated value of $200,000, and we are looking forward to see who is putting their hat in the ring. Back to you, Megan.
All right, thanks, Brian. Any questions? Okay. So next we have some time for updates from subcommittee liaisons. I know a lot of us participate in other aspects of Climate Council work. So if anyone has an update that they'd like to provide from ongoing work of other subcommittees, or any updates related to the budget discussions that have been happening in other subcommittees, we'd be happy to hear from folks if there's anything to share.
I'll just note, I was unfortunately not able to make the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee meeting last Thursday, but there was a presentation and discussion of the marginal abatement cost curve. I'm going to put the link to that final report in the chat right now, and it's really important work that helps us look at across all of the actions that are identified in the pathways to meet our requirements, the cost per ton avoided, or the savings per ton avoided. Oftentimes, these measures are creating lifetime savings that reduce the costs, especially of energy, for Vermonters over time. But this is is something that we have been wanting to have as baseline important reference information for a while, and it's a well done report that I'm glad is available now, and encourage you all to give it a look. If there's questions, you can also view the recording of the presentation, which might be a little bit a good way to learn about it if it feels a little if the paper alone is not sufficient. Any other updates from other subcommittees of the council that it would be good for folks here to know about, either from Just Transitions, Agriculture and Ecosystems, or Rural Resilience?
Hi, Jared. This is Kashka. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm going to stay off camera. So from Just Transitions and I guess steering committee as well, I just wanted to point out that we've had discussions, regarding the budget and the outreach efforts. We wanted to reach out to other committees and make sure that we get support from the other subcommittees with regard to the budget that we put forth regarding the outreach efforts, since that's going to be, I guess, crossing over to the other subcommittees' work. And so we're kind of asking for support of the budget in that respect. And then in the steering committee, there was some questions regarding who would be taking over the roles, the administrative roles for the Climate Council. So that's something I wanted to bring up as well. Thanks so much. And I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
One question I have, Kashka, and it's probably not fair to ask you because it sounds like you're not at a place where it's easy to post this, but maybe Claire or Ken, is in terms of knowing what those recommendations from the Just Transition subcommittee are in terms of outreach and engagement. Is there a link to that document, or can you provide a brief overview of what those recommendations are budget-wise? I'm not sure everybody who's here is familiar with those.
Absolutely. I am not in a position, since I'm driving and it's on my phone. But I think that Jane or I'm not sure who else is in the meeting, to be quite honest, as well. But it is something that we put forward, and the Climate Council has a copy of it. So that could be shared, but not by me, and I apologize for that.
Kashka, it's Claire. I'm also on the call, so I can pull the initial version of the proposal and share that after I stop talking. I'll pull the link and share that in the chat. I don't think that was originally shared with the subcommittee as an example of how we might structure our budget proposal, and I don't know that the substance has changed significantly, but the subcommittee went through a prioritization exercise of the items that had been listed in that sort of initial, it was in table format, and sort of the pieces that rose to the top were around budget to support sort of equitable community engagement, which I think is what Kashka was mentioning, felt like was something that would probably span across subcommittees in terms of wanting to put forward more community engagement efforts. Some sort of, I think, generally speaking, that the public engagement task group has been working on, and even maybe for more targeted sort of issues, like I think our subcommittee talked about, outreach and engagement around sort of science and data related trends and awareness of what's going on in the council. And then I'll just note the other thing that rose to the top was funding to support training of sort of state staff and subcommittees and council members and legislators on some of the guiding principles and tools that exist that came out of that subcommittee. So I don't think we're working on the task group from that subcommittee is working on a revised document that reflects that prioritization, sort of in its structure and sort of in a supporting memo, but the actual components haven't changed significantly. So I think I can share the original document and that will give a good sense of what's included. It will just be a little restructured when the final version goes to the council at the end of this week.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Claire, for doing that.
Okay, so maybe we can come back to that if anybody has any questions, especially when we talk about the Science and Data Subcommittee budget recommendations later in the agenda. Are there any other subcommittee liaison updates, whether formal liaison or informal? We have folks participating in others, and it's always good to just make sure that we're sharing up-to-date and relevant information with each other. Richard.
Yeah, good morning. I was hoping Jane was going to do this but she's gotten off the call. I have been a representative from this subcommittee to the Biomass Task Group, which has representatives from 4 different subcommittees: Just Transitions, Ag and Ecosystems, and Cross Sector. And we've had a sort of an 8-month-long seminar about burning biomass to generate electricity, and issues from forestry, from air quality, from public health, as well as strictly from a greenhouse gas point of view. Over the last week or so, we have drafted a proposed statement that reflects the charge we were given to assess what should be done about electric generating plants that depend on biomass, of which we have 2 in Vermont, Reigate and the one in Burlington, McNeil. And that document is in a process of rapid development. The intent is for the Biomass Task Group to review it in the next several days, and for there to be a presentation to the, I believe, to the whole council next Wednesday. So that's where we stand with that. I will just tell you that this work group, the main recommendation is that we shouldn't build any new biomass burning electric generating plants, and that we shouldn't expand the ones we have. I mean, that's a 2-sentence summary of 8 months worth of work. And there will, once the document is finalized, it will be circulated back to this subcommittee and others.
Thanks for that update, Richard. Okay. Anything else from other subcommittees or task groups, or questions of anyone who's already shared? Yeah, Jay.
Yeah, so on rural resilience, I was only able to attend the first half of the last meeting, but we had 3 or 4 major items to help prioritize funding around, and a lot of the focus is on water as a hazard, and I would say programs, education, to support ANR and other stakeholders in understanding those risks as they are across the state now to, mostly river flooding. Some discussion around, perhaps incorporating other hazards such as wind and outages. And then there was some, getting into the wordsmithing of the recommendations themselves and making sure we're not missing anything there. But it seemed like we were aligned pretty well with that, and we mostly focused on, like I said, the water hazard than anything else.
Thanks, Jay. And just so everybody knows that the meeting of the council at which those that budget conversation and when the attempt to compile the different recommendations across the subcommittees will happen on Monday, October 17th at 11 a.m. Okay. Anything else before we go to subcommittee composition updates? So the first bit of news has already been shared, and my apologies, Megan and Colin, I didn't know who to kind of pass to or defer to in this kind of time of transition. I think you're tag teaming it a bit, but is there anything else that you want to say about the transition in the co-chair role between the two of you and kind of what that timeline and process looks like?
Yeah, Jared, I'm sorry for stealing your thunder. I think in my
No, it's your thunder.
brain fog, I forgot we had added this to the agenda. No, I think obviously I'll continue to support the subcommittee as I can, just given the my work at ANR, and happy to lead the discussion on the budget recommendations today. But I think probably after this meeting, Colin will be more in the co-chair role with you, Jared.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. But thanks. Looking forward to it.
So the other update, as folks may remember, is that there was a great process that Iris led when she was the youth council representative to work to have a youth member who is part of each of the subcommittees of the Climate Council. And I believe that ours is the last subcommittee that does not yet have a youth representative. The great news is that Lily Terry was recently appointed to be the youth representative to the Climate Council, so the actual seat on the council, and is interested in joining this subcommittee and participating and contributing to our work. So there is a challenge in that she has labs at the day and time when we regularly meet. So that would not, and as those of you who, I was not a chemistry major, but chemistry majors assure me that, and I had friends who were, that labs are very difficult to reschedule. So, and I know that this time did not also work really well for Tara Kulkarni, another subcommittee member. So I think what the recommendation would be to have Lily join, and her kind of, more information about her was shared with the full council when she was nominated and appointed to the council. And if and when she joins, she can share more, but to have her join the subcommittee and then see if we can work to find a date that would work for either ideally everyone, or at least as many people as possible for our meetings going forward, which would presumably at this point be monthly. At least that's how they have been. So that's that update. Any questions or thoughts on that? I think it would be good to have this committee kind of formally accept Lily's membership, so that we can update the committee membership documents and then move forward with that scheduling. Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Sorry if I missed something, but I had thought when we added new subcommittee members that we had also added a youth representative, Daryl, I believe, and will she be stepping off the subcommittee, or just wasn't sure?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I forgot that hadn't been shared with the full subcommittee. I think just with the co-chairs that, so yeah, you're absolutely correct. Una was appointed, but is not able to serve. So she kind of has stepped down. I mean, stepped down even, but she had not yet participated in a meeting. She thought she would be able to join the subcommittee and is no longer able. So then there was that vacancy, or that vacancy continued, I guess. Okay. Any other questions or feedback about that? Otherwise, it would be good to move forward in that direction unless anyone has any questions or suggests otherwise.
Well, I think it would be great to have a youth voice on the subcommittee. So looking forward to working with Lily. She was able to attend the last Climate Council meeting. So really looking forward to welcoming her here in this space as well. So, and thanks to Una for wanting to be on but couldn't be on. So.
Thank you, Leslie Ann. Agreed. Okay, I'm just trying to get back to our agenda. So I think now we, unless there's anything else about committee membership that folks want to bring up, which if you do, please raise your hand or say so now. Otherwise, I think it's time for us to move over to the budget priorities. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. And Megan, do you want to introduce that?
Sure. So I sent the link to the draft list of priorities that, as Jared mentioned, we'd worked on earlier this week. And so folks should have access to that document, but I can just put it in the chat as well. 1 second. So it's a brief list and reflective of some of the potential additional work that we need related to ongoing activities. And then the final item, I was hoping to capture the discussion that we had at our last meeting about kind of the science behind behavior and decision-making related to climate topics in general or climate change topics. And the write-up that you see here related to that, and we can go through them in turn, but I just wanted to thank Kevin Geiger, who unfortunately can't join us today, and then Claire for some thoughts that they had emailed to me. I think really nicely summarizing the discussion that we had last time about this need. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. But I guess maybe it makes sense to go through the draft of the task group, and if there are additional items that folks would like to discuss at this juncture. And I guess maybe I'll also just remind folks that we need to provide this list to, I think, Jane, to transmit to the Climate Council in advance of their October 17th meeting tomorrow. We need to provide that, I believe, if not Monday at the latest, so that they have that list well in advance of their meeting, and that Jane can include it with the meeting materials. So we don't have, I don't think, any other opportunities beyond this meeting to discuss, but fortunately we have a good chunk of time here. So hopefully that will be adequate. And yeah, so just wanted to highlight again that this is related to funding that would be utilized in fiscal year 24, which in the state begins on July 1st of 2023. So we do have funding available that we're using in this current fiscal year, obviously related to ongoing work that this subcommittee has supported in the form of the life cycle analysis primarily. And then there's obviously funding going towards some of the other contractual work that we talked about earlier in the meeting. So that's the focus. We did put the priorities and some of the guidance related to developing subcommittee budget proposals in the agenda. So hopefully folks can use that for reference as well. And I can share my screen here so we can go through this together. And I can try to capture any edits or comments that folks might have. Can folks see this draft that I have up? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Megan.
All right. So I might ask, I don't know, Jared, would you be willing to talk maybe a little bit about the first item, since you articulated really well the other day when we were speaking in our task group about some of the unique needs related to the life cycle analysis in Vermont and why we expect that it might take additional resources to develop emissions factors for certain areas of energy use in Vermont?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So some folks may be familiar that there are a number of tools that have been developed by the federal government. Argonne National Labs has a GREET model that is used by Western states, California, Washington, and Oregon. I mean, they change them for state-specific emissions factors, but broadly, that tool is used to assess the life cycle emissions of especially transportation fuels. And so I think that there will be, what we have to do, or what the Global Warming Solutions Act points to, and what this RFP was developed to do, was look at the emissions that are caused by the use of energy in Vermont. And so there will certainly be a starting point on life cycle analysis for a number, certainly for all fossil fuels. Much of that is well established. For kind of non-fossil fuels, especially biofuels in the transportation sector. However, my understanding, and I could be missing something, but in the scanning of kind of both state programs and resources, and in terms of available research and resources, a lot of the life cycle analysis that will need to be done to understand the emissions from energy use in Vermont has not been done by other states in the Northeast, and is somewhat unique and may need to be original in terms, especially on the thermal heating fuel side. For instance, there are in the markets that Vermont, for instance, would draw from would be different than those West Coast markets. And so there will need to be unique life cycle emissions factors developed for the fuels that we both use and may be using. And then the other piece of that is the life cycle analysis of our electricity portfolio. Almost every state, my understanding is that they are almost all looking at site emissions or burner tip emissions or generation emissions. And while there have been some studies that look further upstream, I think New York has looked into this some. A lot of this is very new and emerging on the science side, and there aren't as many resources to take this total energy life cycle emissions analysis approach. Certainly, there are some great resources on the transportation side, but my expectation is that it's very possible, especially given the limited budget that was made available for the life cycle analysis initially, is that for us to get a more confident view of what the appropriate life cycle emissions and the emissions factors should be for different types of energy use in Vermont, it may have to go beyond what was originally in that RFP. Or that there may need to be a greater level of detail that is arrived at than the initial budget for the RFP would allow. So that was the rationale in terms of making sure that we don't hit a point in that life cycle analysis work where the funds run out and then there's not funds in the budget to keep moving that forward, so we get a more complete picture and finished product. I would welcome Megan or Colin or others to say anything about that, but that was the thinking behind this recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I don't have much to add to that, but I guess I'll just say that, yeah, I think it's hard to know for sure until we kind of get the results back from that contract. But I think you're right that there certainly could be some nuances and some kind of, say, uniqueness to our energy pathways that really hasn't been explored yet. So yeah, I would agree with you that there could certainly be more work needed, especially depending on the level of granularity we want to get into for our pathways.
Jay?
Just a general question to be clear on the use of the funding. Is this going to be funding for all of these areas that we are going to use strategically, internally, or are we thinking we may put out additional requests for proposals with other vendors or or just flexibility generally to do as we need to do it with?
I think it would be more that last one, Jay, that and this was something Jane was mentioning when she was on, is that we're going to try to craft the current contract to contemplate the fact that there, could be additional investigation needed in these unique areas, so that if we wanted to expand the current contract to include additional funding to do that work, it would be very straightforward and we wouldn't need to go back out to bid. So we're going to try to kind of, prepare for that in the event that we need to do that work.
Okay, thank you. That helps. I think having that flexibility is important, and having listened to a lot of the conversation here, this is just want to emphasize that I support this first area. Thanks.
Thanks, Jay. And I'll just note that there's two pieces to this underneath that broader 150,000 number. The 25,000 is that once the tool has been created, it will need to be updated. And since we're looking out a budget year even farther beyond the year that the initial analysis would be delivered, each year our electricity portfolio changes, the relative amounts and proportions of fuels change. And so what is envisioned is that this supplemental analysis would continue on a regular ongoing basis, and therefore would need some extra support annually to make sure that that can be updated and delivered. So that's in there as well.
Thanks, Jared. And on that note, we do have resources to do that kind of temporary / seasonal work for this fiscal year. And we're planning to have Jeff Merrill back in that role for the kind of winter, spring time period to help assist with the current life cycle emissions contract, potentially working more with Colin on the agricultural emissions contract, and then, and other kind of ongoing supplemental work that we have there. So that's covered for this year, hopefully, but definitely a need for future fiscal years. Claire?
Thanks. Might not know the answer to this question right now, but so I guess I'm just building off what Jared, you were saying about where we may need to do more investigation on or development of new emissions factors. Is the feeling that this funding we would sort of do the best we have to accomplish the scope of work in the current contract with the funding that we have, and that would result in sort of an initial tool, but would highlight, for example, areas that needed further work, or that these resources would be able to potentially, if there's a really big gap that prevents the completion of the original scope of work, could fill them in. And then I guess the question for that second piece is just looking at, when knowing that the original project was intended to be complete, I think originally early next year, and I think a little bit delayed, just wondering about the timing of the funding with the fiscal years, and if that's a concern for completion of the scope of work, or if that's thinking too deep in the weeds.
Yeah, I think both of those are right, Claire. I mean, I think that both for this recommendation and for the next one, it is covering our bases to make sure that if there are key gaps or additional detail that's needed, that we have the ability to make that happen, rather than kind of having unfinished work caught at a standstill and then having to wait a year because there's no funds to move it forward. I think the challenging thing with each of these is that they're both complex, unique, big enough pieces of work that it's hard to have confidence that, I think there's certainly the possibility that we get a fully developed supplemental life cycle analysis on energy use in Vermont. My expectation is that given the budget that was provided for that what will mainly be possible is a literature review of existing emissions factors, finding the appropriate range for different fuels. But oftentimes, much of that research has happened not in a kind of has happened elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world. And so sometimes it's not always, as you know, appropriate to like borrow emissions factors that were developed in another context for different sources and production methods. And my expectation is that there's a lot of that just work that hasn't been done in Vermont yet. And so if we want to have more confident numbers that are more, specific to our location and fuel sources, it would probably be more in the realm of, taking what are placeholder values found in the literature to make them more specific and accurate to Vermont, because it's just my sense that a lot of that hasn't been done yet, unless I'm missing whole areas of research and reports and resources on other state websites that we haven't found yet.
Thanks, Jared.
All right, any other comments or questions on the first item or edits, suggested edits? Okay, I'm going to move on to the second item, which is of a similar nature in terms of the ability to have funding to support ongoing work in the event that we need additional resources. And I might ask Colin if you could explain what led us to add this particular item, given your involvement in the RFP development and then also your conversations with folks at AG. I think would be helpful too.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Megan. So yes, like Megan mentioned, this is kind of a similar ask to the previous one. So the current AG RFP to kind of explore the universe of tools to estimate emissions and sinks in the agricultural space, kind of using a net framework. That's kind of the focus of the current RFP, but it's being funded through a U.S. Climate Alliance grant, and that's kind of a cap of $75,000. And so I know there were several people in the Agency of Agriculture, food markets, that thought that that was probably not going to be enough funding to complete this work, because there are a number of tools out there, and we've also asked for them to explore kind of all the necessary data sets to go into these tools. And so some of that exploration has been done with the carbon budget and the kind of research that went into putting that together. But my understanding from it is that there's a lot more work to be done. And so their opinion was that that 75,000 would probably not be enough money to complete that whole kind of holistic view and looking into all these tools. So that's why this is in here for some supplemental funding for that 75,000.
Any questions about this item?
This is Richard. That's not really a question. I'm strongly in support of this. With some colleagues, we just finished a complete draft of a greenhouse gas inventory for Addison County, which is one of the two most agricultural counties in Vermont. And I would have really liked to have the results of this proposed project in hand in doing that inventory. What we did do was from the 2017 Census of Agriculture, we know how many acres of Addison County farmland were in 2017 being managed with legume cover crops or with no-till or low-till practices, which are the two most commonly applied practices that are thought to sequester carbon. And we obtained from USDA with Ryan Patch's help estimates of how much carbon is sequestered per acre with those practices, and then multiply those two numbers together, and you say, well, we think that in 2017, all the farmers in Addison County collectively sequestered a certain number of tons of carbon dioxide. The 2022 agricultural census is in the field right now, And so we don't have data for 2020 or 2022. So we're unable to, it's quite possible that farmers have increased the number of acres that are being treated with those two treatments, but we don't know that. I guess there's a long way around here to say that we need to be sure that we have good methods of monitoring the implementation of various sequestration methods in the state. How many acres where are being monitored, are being managed with what sequestration or mitigation methods? And absent that kind of data, this is we're not going to make the kind of progress we need to make.
Thanks, Richard.
All right. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, and we're focusing on measuring emissions here because that's what's codified, but just echoing what Richard was saying about sequestration and all the natural forms of carbon storage. And maybe this is out of scope for this area though, but where is that work happening? And it's an emerging area of the science too, so it's hard to put that in writing. In thinking about the biomass working group, maybe this is a question back to you, Richard. I do think that's an important component. I just wanted to reinforce that as something that we're going to need to keep track of, and it'll creep up on us if we don't stay ahead of that.
The biomass working group task group has been specifically focused on burning biomass to generate electricity. We've inevitably also touched on burning biomass for building heat. And that's one of our recommendations, is to flesh that out further, and that's an important gap in our understanding and in our policy work. But
I think,
but neither of those have to do specifically with farming; they have to do with the forestry piece.
Got it. So suffice to say, for the agricultural emissions, the net emissions, there's some sequestration that takes into account against emissions in this analysis as we're thinking about it. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And yeah, I'll just add, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Jack, but I think all of the tools that we put forward, kind of with the help of recommendation of ag and ecosystems and the ag agency, are in that net framework. So they all take into account like the management practices to increase sequestration and soil carbon and all that. So we really kind of the purpose of the RFP, in so many words, is to kind of find the best tool with the best methodology for Vermont that we are able to kind of, or have at least some semblance of the input data to run the model. So it's kind of like combining the best tool that we can use with the available data to come up with the best estimate in the end. And we don't know what that is yet. And so that's kind of the purpose of this, is to figure out what the best combination there is. But yes, sequestration is certainly important. And I'll just call out that Ryan and Judson and Ag have been kind of hammering that point home for a long time, how important that is. And we certainly agree. We just haven't really had the data to kind of get to that point, and certainly for the whole land use sector, but we're working on it. So this is kind of a definitely first step in the ag area.
All right. I will move on unless there's anything else. Okay. So this last item, our task group categorized not under kind of ongoing analysis related to the CAP, but obviously under the public engagement, and also thought it had the dual purpose and kind of the general organizing category that had been described in the budget planning process, and certainly open to a lot of feedback here, from the dollar amount required to, the description here. As I said, the discussion we had at the last meeting was incredibly helpful, and really enlightening for me. I really supportive of this type of work related to surveying and data collection and understanding the public's perspective on this type of work, and was thinking in our task group earlier this week about how there've been, some pitches at the EAN summit in the last few years that have touched on this, but haven't gained as much traction, just maybe because this is a harder thing to pitch. I think, this is a harder sell maybe in some instances than some of the other items that tend to get funding. But I think that this is really important, and I feel like there's many entities that would benefit from a better understanding of public perspective and their behavior in reaction to the work that the Climate Council is doing. So, but again, just really, not being an expert and relying on some good input from others on the subcommittee, put this together. So please feel free to weigh in or make recommendations as to the level of funding that we should be asking for here.
So Megan, I think it's a great addition to our list here. I had a couple of suggestions as we look at some of these pieces. This would be a great place to do that outreach to two other subcommittees, to just transitions, in support of a lot of the things that Kashka had mentioned a little while ago, in sort of lifting up the ways in which, when we think about public engagement and outreach across the board and not only in one subcommittee. So this would be a great place to sort of maybe add a couple words that sort of speak to that, maybe even in the title itself. So public engagement and outreach, and then / general organizing might be one place where you could do that. I also think in the second to last full sentence, where we talk about the actions in the climate action plan that are necessary to reduce emissions, if we put and support adaptation, then we're also doing an outreach to the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee in the work that they are trying to lift up by adding adaptation in there. So reduce emissions and support adaptation. And
Great.
then in that last sentence there, measuring what forms of communication and engagement, but you already have engaged, so maybe communication and outreach, right, on climate change related issues. Very last, yeah. Same sentence, last 3 words.
Sorry, what did you want me to add to the end?
Climate change related issues.
Oh, sorry.
So just add change in there.
I gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I'm with you. I'm with you. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Okay, and I can work on incorporating, just acknowledging that this will be a task that should be happening across the subcommittee.
Right. And then to speak to your question about the funding amount, it's the least of the 3 that we're asking for. And if we think about some of the amounts that some of the other subcommittees are asking for, if we really want to emphasize that this is critically important, and again, cross-cutting, we might want to consider increasing that amount.
Okay. Do you have a factor in mind?
I knew you were going to ask that.
I just have no concept of what costs would be here.
Right. So I'm going to actually kick the ball to both Jay and Kashka for some of the amounts that they have in the subcommittees that they sit on that might have a ballpark that they could throw in here.
Okay, well, I know Claire, you have your hand up. I'm just gonna go to Kashka really quick if you have any specific input on that.
Well, as I said, I think this is difficult for me to talk about in a sense where I'm not quite sure if science and data has discussed what I think other subcommittees have discussed, and that is almost bundling their outreach efforts into what our budget already has been asked for. Whether or not that's something to consider. And then once the proposal is made to the Climate Council, that can be the ask of all the subcommittees. And I think that's what I was kind of trying to point to, only because, from being on the Just Transition Subcommittee and seeing how other subcommittees are doing their own outreach, and it's been in the past, it's just been too chaotic. It hasn't been, it just hasn't been streamlined in a way where everybody benefits from the outreach. So there are so many different factors, and there's so many subcommittees, so many different things going on. But if we could somehow place it all together and have, I'm not saying one subcommittee in charge of the outreach, but certainly aware of what's going on through the subcommittees, that might be something that's beneficial going forward and to present to the Climate Council as a whole. So I just wanted to see what you guys thought about that, number one. And then number two, that number, quadruple that for sure.
Thanks, Kashka. I think that all makes a lot of sense, and I'll try to articulate those thoughts, just building off of what Leslie Ann said related to this, being more of a coordinated effort with other subcommittees, and just acknowledging, the goals of each subcommittee and how the work of each subcommittee would benefit from this effort. More broadly. So I'm happy to try to integrate that into the title and just acknowledge that this is very cross-cutting work.
Thank you so much.
Claire?
Sorry, unmute button is being a little sticky.
Sorry.
I guess I had a question which feeds a little bit into, I think, what Kashka and Leslie and maybe were mentioning. So my initial question that I put my hand up was for, I guess, what was envisioned that this budget ask is for? Is it for putting out an RFP for a consultant or some other entity to come in and summarize the existing body of literature on how social sciences, behavioral decision-making sciences, however you want to categorize them, could be integrated into the various work of the council around what I see in here is public engagement, measuring and assessing progress, and then actually developing recommendations themselves. So I guess that's one question, what was sort of the deliverable for this item? Is it an RFP like that or something else? And then I guess depending on the answer to that question, when I hear Kashka say and Leslie Ann about thinking about reaching out across subcommittees, I then wonder, that seems like a cross-cutting initiative across subcommittees, understanding sort of the full scope of the council's work and how to weave the social sciences into that around climate change. But then that felt a little different than I think some of the other conversation we had, which was more focused on an actual budget item for supporting some of the public engagement work, for example, that Just Transitions is supporting through the public engagement task group and other initiatives. And so I wasn't sure if this was meant to capture both of those or just one of those, and if maybe just the former, we wanted to consider a second item specifically on the latter, which I think both, again, could be cross-cutting, but I was just curious what the intent of, I had hoped to be involved in the task group meeting, but was taken out possibly by the same cult Megan has. So.
I think that's a great question, Claire, because it's almost as if we have 2 or 3 different pieces all in here. So there's an actual data piece, the quantification piece, and there's the, what is it we're quantifying? And if I go back to the notes from last time, there's this notion that we don't know all of the various things that we've been doing or how well they've worked and how all of this information is being received. And so how do people use the information that they get was one of the big questions. And so I think I like your question because it's sort of like, where do we actually put the fine point on what is it we're asking for here? And where do we try to do that outreach in the sense that this is a question that's not just for our subcommittee, but it's also popping up in other places as well. And so are we the folks who actually coordinate a lot of this thinking, or are we the folks that coordinate a lot of the data metrics around it? So.
Jared?
Yeah, I'll just say I have a lot of the same questions, and I think that the budget number should flow from a clearer sense of, you know, what, I mean, there were a couple of reference points that we used. I mean, it does speak to data collection to measure public awareness. And, you know, my understanding, this is dated now 4 years, but when we had previously asked folks, you know, what it costs to put in the field a really high quality survey with sufficient sample size and methods to deliver, you know, confident results, it was, you know, in the $30,000 to $40,000 range to get, you know, a good statewide survey completed. That I think is another possibility besides kind of contract and consulting. But I do think that this would benefit from more clarity about the kind of proposed strategy and use of funds, and that would make it easier to get towards a budget number. I think the other thing that we need to take into account about this is the timing, because it references the future climate action plan development. And I think I've brought this up in other meetings, but it's not clear to me based on the language that's in the Global Warming Solutions Act when that next plan is delivered. So I'll just mention that if you look at page 8 of the Global Warming Solutions Act, and that is B2 under 591, it says, you know, that the first climate action plan has to be adopted by December 1st, 2021, which it was, and then that subsequent plans need to be delivered on or before July 1st every 4 years after. But July is, you know, half year different than December. So does 4 years thereafter mean 3.5 years, July 1st, 2025, or does it mean 4.5 years, July 1st, 2026? And I think the interpretation of when that next plan is due will affect our timelines and planning for the type of engagement and outreach that's happening, and whether it is communicating about the existing plan, which has already been adopted, versus gathering feedback in the development of a new plan. And so it looks like, based on the title, this is more kind of forward-looking, but if you know, my understanding is that the Agency of Natural Resources is interpreting the law. I don't know if others have a different interpretation, that the next plan would be due July 1st, 2026, so 4.5 years after. And so I just think that will have to, I don't think that, if that's the case, then I don't think that this would be focused on future plan development as an FY24 budget request. But just wanted to note that. I'm sorry, I don't have a suggested path forward, but I mostly wanted to agree with what was previously said and raise that consideration on timeline and focus of the work.
So I see what you mean about the, maybe it's the choice of the word future in the title there. Because if I go back to some of the things that we were talking about last time that sort of led to this particular bullet point, we were looking at gaps in our knowledge, gaps in the data. Do we actually have what we need to make our decisions? Do we have what we need to know how well the plan is being implemented as it is right now? And so I think some of that is still in there. Maybe the future piece is the wrong lens, or maybe it needs to be tweaked a little bit. But I think part of all of this was, what do we know? What don't we know? How are we trying to move a lot of that forward? Who's using the information? What do folks need to have in their toolkit to use the information, and pieces around that? And I would love if some of the other members of the subcommittee who were present, who haven't had a chance to say anything as yet for today, could possibly weigh in if they so feel comfortable.
Go ahead, Claire.
I was gonna put my hand down to leave space for others, also wanting to hear from, because I've spoken a couple times, but while other people noodle on their own thoughts, I was just gonna say, I feel like, yeah, maybe similar to what Leslie Ann said, like future development is the wrong kind of wording. I think some of what in there is looking at sort of existing understanding, which I do think would inform future implementation actions and development of the future climate action plan. But I think, well, both knowing how long it takes to do things in state government that require a contract, and bringing in outside help, but also knowing that some of this information would be informative of actions that we're doing now, I think, yeah, maybe that is just the incorrect wording. And again, I think it depends on sort of the deliverable. Again, is it looking for someone to come in and advise on how we could better weave in these types of social science insights into various aspects of sort of climate action plan development, implementation, and work? Because I could see that that could be helpful to have, especially if the next plan was due in 2025, but even if it was due in July 26, to have time to sort of understand and integrate and think about that. And then some of the measuring pieces, I think Leslie Ann touched on this, seem a little bit more immediate too than the deadlines there. So for me, it was a little more disorganized than it was in my head, but happy to answer questions if it was unclear.
That was great, Claire. That was very helpful. So just trying to think about the feedback related to the title. Would a better word here be to inform climate action plan, maybe implementation as well as development? Does that get at some of the comments? So it would be to inform.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you, Catherine. Yep.
Okay. I apologize for my computer problems. I was down in Massachusetts visiting my son, and I came back on the Greyhound bus, and my luggage was stolen, and my charger cord for my laptop in it. So I've borrowed my daughter's computer, and is it working properly?
Are there folks having trouble hearing Catherine?
Yeah, Catherine, we're having a hard time hearing, I think, because maybe a connection issue. So it's a little slow and broken up, unfortunately.
Catherine, is it possible to try turning the video off? And if that doesn't work, perhaps putting a comment in the chat? We can't hear you, Catherine, unfortunately.
All right, well, hopefully Catherine can weigh in via the chat. In the meantime, I see Kashka, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I just have a suggestion for Catherine. If she has good cell phone service, she can do the Zoom via her cell phone. And the cellular service typically has, like, for example, I'm not using Wi-Fi either. And sometimes when the connection is really difficult to grab a hold of on Wi-Fi, it's beneficial to use the cellular towers. So that's just a suggestion if she's having issues with the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and Catherine, if you can hear us, that's the phone number that I emailed to you yesterday. That should work to connect as well. Thanks, Kashka.
Sure.
All right. So hopefully sorry, I'm just opening up the chat. Okay, thanks, Claire. Okay, so that's the changes to the title, hopefully to reflect those comments. And then I want to also go back to the other points I think Leslie Ann and Claire, you were making about like the next steps. And so it feels to me like maybe we need to add an additional sentence here related to, you know, what other work would be done or how we would respond to this, like the final piece of conducting the outreach based on the data collection, like what would come following that piece of the work. So it sounds like it would need to be, you know, an additional stage of taking the outreach process and using that component of the work to inform the actual implementation and development work. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm capturing, but it does seem like we do need an additional element here.
So one of the words that has come up a lot at UBM in the sustainability space is the notion of what's called circularity, which means that, you know, you get the information and that feeds back into improving the process and it keeps going. So if there's a way of maybe adding, let me see if I can find where that would make most sense. If you wanted to add the sentence at the very end, maybe I'll put it in the chat, Megan, because I have to think about it first before I say it. So I'll do that.
That sounds great. Thanks, Leslie Ann. Kasha, is that your hand from before, or do you have another comment?
Oh, it's my hand from before, but
Okay.
I did just want to say, I really like, and I know I'm not on the subcommittee, I just really like what Leslie Ann had just said about the circularity, just to kind of put forth the notion that things don't just happen in a vacuum, and having, you know, public comment and input really reflects well on the whole process and makes it so much better going forward. In addition to, you know, having the changes be made that need to be made because of the public comment, because of the input that's coming in. So I really like that notion. I'm not sure where to stick it in there, but I can see where it would be beneficial. Thank you.
I'm wondering if the voice we're kind of hearing over the phone line is Catherine's, but it's still kind of hard to hear.
Can you hear? I haven't been speaking yet.
Oh,
But it sounds to me like someone else is speaking. Is someone else speaking?
it sounds like maybe we're just picking up some background noise. on your end, but we can hear you great, Catherine. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, great, thank you. What I was trying to say earlier is that my computer isn't working right now, and I borrowed my daughter's computer. And Megan sent me a phone number to call in on my phone, which I'm able to do. And I just wanted to underscore what Leslie Ann said and the importance of information and education as a big step forward.
Thanks, Catherine. I think the background might actually be us hearing ourselves through your computer. So you might want to turn the volume down on your computer, because I think we're just hearing ourselves twice, maybe.
Okay.
But we can hear you great. Thank you for that feedback. Any other comments or considerations on this item? I know it looks like Leslie Ann is typing away, so we're waiting. That's fine. Anything else?
I guess a question I have, and I'd be curious if Kashka or Claire or anybody else who has looked more closely, I've been trying to multitask, but not fully able to do it, looked more closely at the Just Transition Subcommittee budget recommendations. It's not clear to me whether this recommendation as drafted here would be kind of a separate one coming from the Science and Data Subcommittee, or if there is enough overlap and connection to another one coming out of Just Transition that there should be a consideration of a merged or a joint recommendation on this topic. So I would just put that question out there.
I think that's a great question, Jared, and I think that's the $1 million question right there. Whether or not that should be one continuous thing throughout the committees, the subcommittees, or whether each subcommittee should have their own budget for that. I'm just not sure how to answer that, but I think that's something that should be considered. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the other kind of other consideration here is that my understanding of, and Megan or Colin or Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the way that the Agency of Natural Resources has historically thought about kind of its budget requests and its prioritization of funds in their budget. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for joining as long as you could. Looks like Richard has to leave the meeting now. Is that what has been prioritized are pieces that are required by the Global Warming Solutions Act, things like the development of a municipal vulnerability index, pointing towards having a life cycle analysis of energy use in Vermont, et cetera. And that kind of those are the main focus. And so my question, and so then staff has been devoted to support the kind of further research, analysis, contractual work that's necessary to meet those requirements that are explicitly laid out in the Global Warming Solutions Act. I think the challenge in thinking about this topic that we're discussing right now, and that is this third piece, is how would it be managed? I mean, I think in the past, when there's been work that's been identified, that's mostly happening through the Climate Office. But what I feel like we have heard in the past from Secretary Moore is that office is at capacity, not planning to add more staff, not planning to do anything beyond the administration's recommendation. So I think that it behooves us then to ask the question, if we were going to propose this, how would that be managed and implemented? Because it's not clear to me that it would have a home. And so I don't know if Just Transitions has thought about that. Like, not just what would be the ideal amount of funding they think is available for this type of work, but then how it would be implemented and where it would live. That's just a question in my mind that if anyone has more clarity than I do on it, I'd love to hear it, because it's not clear to me where it would live or where it would go if there is not that kind of management support or piece of it. I don't know if that's come up, Claire or Kashka, in Just Transitions, but.
Yes, so I do understand your question now, Jared, sorry about that. And I understand it more fully. So our budget asks are basically for several different items that we went ahead and prioritized into 3. And I'm not sure if you guys have that in front of you, the initial draft that we put together. But what we're asking for is, 1, so that there is money for the community members who have been active in the subcommittees that are involved in frontline communities and that are able to energize community members who will be out there doing the work, right? So that money is there to support, to have support for community members who will be eventually doing the work that Just Transitions subcommittee members and others will be training them to do. And in addition to the person in charge of outreach in the new climate office as well. So that's one of the things. And another, and I'm going off my head, I'm so sorry. Another one has to do with support of other agencies and having money in the budget for them to be able to support their employees and their people who are doing the work for us as well. So partner agencies. So the money would be there for them as well. And then, gosh, I forget the third. I'm so sorry. I don't have it in front of me and I'm on my phone. Do we have that?
Yeah, Megan's helpfully scrolling through it right now. It's on the screen for us all.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, this is like our initial draft. Okay. I can't see it very well, but maybe Claire can.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think you hit the top 2, Kashka, pretty well, which were a big part of discussion, like the funding for partners and compensation. And then support, I think, for some of that more direct community engagement, like communications and marketing, translation services, sort of specific grants for supporting like generational voices coming into the conversation, which this is the old structure. I think some of the reorganization will show how those things could be considered a little more holistically, but I think I was doing the quick math. So I think the subcommittee budget for engagement comes out to just under somewhere between 600,000 and 700,000 once you put all those various components together. As like in terms of comparing to the number that we have. And I guess, yeah, I'll stop there. So Kashka, you started off really well, and it was just part of the like supporting components in addition that we included in our budget.
Yeah, and if I may, I think I can put more of a visual representation by saying, like, if you can imagine, okay, so science and data is coming up with things and needs to do some community outreach, wants to let people know what's going on, how it's working, how it may affect them. So say there's a committee you've communicated this to that committee for the outreach. So that committee goes ahead and puts forth different kinds of, whether it's flyers or pamphlets or whatever it may be, and then does the outreach representing the science and data ask, I guess you would say. And then somebody compiles that data and brings it back to science and data. That's my understanding of it, and that's my hope for it, I guess. Just have a more calculated, streamlined process for the entire climate council, with the subcommittees being underneath the umbrella of the climate council, but having to have that information given to one entity instead of each subcommittee doing their own kind of thing. That's my idea. That's my thought on this. Whether or not it's going to happen, who knows?
So I see Claire has her hand up. I just want to do a brief time check. It's about 11:35 now, and I think we've got, we're scheduled for public comment at 11:45. So I think hopefully we can try to orient towards getting towards a recommendation committee consensus before that point. So Claire, go for it.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add to what Kashka said. I think she summed it up as well. It feels like there's definitely maybe overlap in the intention of the items. I guess I just wonder, like, if there's a specific thing, like a survey that the subcommittee wants to do, maybe like a portion of our budget could overlap with just transitions, in terms of like using those supporting those community partners to help sort of distribute it or inform how it gets put out, and the translation services that are used to make sure it's accessible, and marketing. But just looking at, if like a $300,000 budget from us, if we fully merge that with just transitions, would be, you know, a significant portion of their budget, which I just don't know how that would work with like all the other asks from the subcommittee. So that was just what I was going to flag in terms of monetary amount. But generally speaking, it seems like we all, we're all moving in concert, in parallel, and that always supports sort of general understanding. So
I wonder if one option, and anyone please tell me if you think I'm off base here, but it feels to me that when I look at that Just Transition Subcommittee budget proposal, the line that seems to be the most connected to what is here on the screen is the communications and marketing. And I wonder if it would be a friendly amendment to their budget to basically utilize the behavioral science and data collection kind of tools and resources that we're pointing to inform that, if that could be kind of a joint recommendation. You know, maybe that could be within that budget, or it needs to be changed a little bit, but I wonder if that's one option where it's kind of, there's those top two, the first ones we talked about, having additional funds available to finish life cycle and ag emissions work as a science and data subcommittee recommendation, and then more of like a science and informed and strategy around communications and marketing that's joint with the Just Transition Subcommittee.
sorry, Jared, are you saying that would be in addition to what is drafted here, or that as a part of?
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way to connect them, where it seems like their recommendation is more on putting together and then sharing the specific kind of communications and outreach and engagement methods, actually doing it. Whereas what this might be is more some of the research that goes into it. So if we kind of pair, I think we could pair ours back on, if it's more of the, you know, the survey side, the collection of some of the research that would be needed to inform that, and then the implementation of it could be what's in their budget, is one option.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's definitely worth noting the potential overlap in our write-up, and that could be a coordinated and shared piece of the overall project.
And I guess I would just add that I think if the goal of the subcommittee is to understand sort of a holistic picture of where Vermonters sit on some of the items mentioned there, that where just transitions or expertise really, I think, shines, is knowing how to reach, and they have the partner engagement on how to equitably reach all our Vermont communities. So to me, that also speaks to overlap, I think, with some of the other components, not just the communication and marketing.
Yeah. So in the data collection side, like how to actually collect data from the communities that we want to hear from, Claire?
Yeah, or how to establish relationships and, not just collect data from them, I think, but also listen to them and sort of have more of a, I think what I've learned a lot from working with Kashka and others, and the way they approach public engagement is it's really a two-way flow of information. It's us understanding and listening and thinking about how that influences what we do, in addition to sort of the other piece of understanding, like what do people know about our climate action plan, and trends and data and things like that. So
yeah. Well, this is really great feedback, and I'm happy to integrate these comments related to coordination and overlap with the other recommendations in the Just Transitions subcommittee budget, and adding some of the detail that folks have mentioned. I, like Leslie Ann, have a hard time doing that live in front of everyone. So I don't know if folks feel comfortable with me trying to incorporate that offline. I'm happy to send the draft around this afternoon for folks to take a look at, if that is a reasonable approach to everyone.
Yeah, I think this is the moment. If anyone has any kind of concerns directionally with this group of recommendations or amounts, to speak up now. Otherwise, I feel like, given the short time frame, that's really our only option, and I appreciate you being willing to do that, Megan.
Sure. I just want to note too that I did add the last sentence regarding the circularity that Leslie Ann had mentioned earlier. That's at the end of the paragraph now.
And especially Kashka, please correct me if I'm misinterpreting what you said, but when I heard you earlier say quadruple that 75 number to 300 to be closer to in line with what's envisioned by the Just Transitions budget, I'm wondering if part of that was assuming that this wouldn't just be about doing the research and analysis, but then applying it in the way that they're doing it. And so if part of that kind of application implementation funding is already captured in their budget, and we're saying that we support that communications and marketing piece, I wonder if it really is the research, the survey piece that goes into it, if this should be then lower. I'll just say, I think 300 feels high to me if we're connecting to their budget, which is more inclusive.
You're exactly right. If it is just a standalone, then I think a lower figure would be much better. I thought you were, as we were talking about, coordinating the efforts of both. That's where the quadruple figure was stated. So you're exactly right, Jared.
Thanks, Kashka.
Okay. So I made that note, Jared. I'll add that in the description as well, that the amount above contemplates a reality where this is a standalone effort, but acknowledging that that's not likely to be the case given the likely overlap with other subcommittee work.
And I think to the extent that this becomes a joint thing, because we're all trying to do the same thing or at least lift each other up. I don't have any problem having that as an amount because it actually speaks to how important it is to do this work and to do it well and to do it right. And I think having an amount that's too small sends the opposite signal. So I think when we have that discussion on the 17th, a lot of these pieces could sort of bubble up again, and we could sort of really speak to that cross-cutting, as Claire mentioned, cross-cutting pieces across how important all of these elements are, and then shake out whatever the number comes up to be. But I'm hearing everybody say that we all support this, right?
I think that makes a lot of sense, Leslie Ann.
Okay. Thanks. That sounds like a great proposed way forward. Thanks for taking those next steps, Megan, and everybody for this feedback. I think this looks like a great document to share with some important components to our work together. Anything else before we move to public comment? Okay. So would invite anyone who is joining who is not a subcommittee member to, which I don't see. I think everybody who's joining is a subcommittee member, assuming that the phone is Catherine's. So I think it probably makes sense. Megan, Colin, please add anything, but I think the last piece is just for the next meeting. I think given the addition of Lily and the challenge that Tara had, I think what we need to do is send out another scheduling poll, but presumably, given that a number of these RFPs and the analytical work that the Science and Data Committee is advising on is fast moving, I feel like we probably, would want to meet again within a month to make sure that we're staying on top of things. So yeah, we'll work to send out that scheduling poll and look to schedule something in early to mid-November would be my default assumption, if that sounds good to everybody. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time. And if there's no objection, meeting adjourned.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
everyone.
much. Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Hey, Megan.
Yeah.
I unfortunately realized this 3/4 of the way through the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Pause and ask anybody about minutes. Do you know if there was anybody who was taking notes